This body, it has the power I need. I feel a connection to it I can't explain. This could be who I am.
You've been given a chance to start over with a clean slate. How many of us get that?
Why did an enemy warship respond to me? Because I knew that ship. I've been on others like it, haven't I?
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Me and Oscar today, and we're going to be talking about Battle Angel Alita Last Order. So last time I talked about Alita was right before the movie came out, and in that review I mentioned that, it just felt like it just ended abruptly and that there was more, and then somebody in the comments mentioned, oh yeah, because actually there's a sequel for this series, and then there's a sequel to that, and I was like, oh okay, I never heard about those series, so I guess that's why it was off my radar. And so I was like, you know what, it's been long enough. It's time to tackle the sequel here, Last Order. And this came out in 2001, ended in 2014. It published over there in Ultra Jump, right? Of course, classic hits like JoJolion. And it is still written and drawn by Yukito Kishiro with 124 chapters. And to my surprise, this started 6 years after the original series ended. Yeah, so Last Order, basically how it starts is how the last series end. It is a little different though, and I think that's just how the mangaka wanted to have the ending go, so that way it fits better into the beginning of this story. And it's with Alita being revived, and she's with Nova, and they want to climb up the space ladder over into like basically the higher tier of society, and then that's where the story takes a crazy turn. And that's pretty much what the whole series is coming into. It's definitely refreshing with all the sci-fi stuff. I think that's probably my favorite part of the series, is we could really explore space and what other colonies did on other planets. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I have to give it to the series because it really introduces a lot of science terms. I will say that it is pretty heavy in that aspect. You get a lot of these terms kind of thrown at you. A lot in one chapter, and sometimes it's a lot of new words.
Yeah, definitely, man. And I think that's good for this. It's definitely, a big change of pace for the series, where we actually get a lot of variations and we get to see other cool things and like the interesting stuff with what we can do with these cyborg bodies as well. As we see Alita, she gains a new body here from Nova, and it's called the Imaginos body. And, it's just a cool big upgrade. We do see the returning cast of her clones, right? Sex and the two twins. And then, later down the line, Sex gets a new body, and then we get to see how he can utilize it. And that's pretty cool and interesting. And then even just with every other cyborg that we just see in space, and then what eventually we find like a planet like, I think it was Venus, and how like, well, they're not really using machines, they're using bioengineering, and the terms there, yeah, that can be pretty wild too, but we get to see how vastly unique almost every planet is for the most part. But yeah, there's definitely stuff here to keep you engaged. And at first when I was reading this, I was like, this is kind of like a sequel to the series. This is going on with what Alita is doing, her main objective to save her friend Lou, right, that she befriended back in the original series. But then things started changing, and as far as I can, I'm like, this isn't really a sequel. To me, it feels like more like a continuation at this point of what Alita's just been doing this whole time. I gotta say, man, I do enjoy the writing here for the story. He does a stellar job as always. Every new character introduced was fantastic, even with the backgrounds and just their motivations. All that was pretty great. But it's sad to say on my end, everything was interesting except for the main character herself, Alita. What she wanted to do for a good, I would say like the first half of the series, I just really wasn't feeling her as an interesting character at all. I was more interested in her clones, which is, funny enough.
Yeah, I agree with you through the majority of the tournament as well. It just really clashes with her personality. Because outside of battle, I mentioned this off record, when I was speaking about the manga to you originally. It's just she's a very moody character. And occasionally, as a moody character, all she's going to want to do, for lack of a better term, just, just kind of bitch and sigh about everything. And that's literally what she does. She'll just go to like some random part of the ship and just fucking wander around and talk to herself and just be moody. And like that, if I remember correctly, that occasionally like made her late for like fights and shit like that. Like she would like show up pretty much last minute or whatever the case was, just because, and I just think that's just like, for a main character, you're extremely selfish. You're supposed to be, I feel like grown in a sense, considering that this is your continuation. Like, you should have learned some more things about yourself, but you're still like acting like you are from the very beginning, where you're just internalizing everything to yourself. But I didn't like that. The other characters, like the twins, they were great. Like, I know that you mentioned that they were your favorites. I would say, like, among the Space Angels, like, probably Sex would be my favorite. Sex had a lot of interesting fights, always coming back and like trying to do his best to do everything. And I think I remember one fight where he had to use both of his bodies at the same time.
Sex really surprised me in the series for how much growth he had. It was really great because like it wasn't really until like the tournament stuff started in this manga, which ends up taking over the entire series for the most part. Yeah, seeing him grow and actually changing as a character. We get the new, it's like it's not as different as his original design, but it's unique enough to be like, yeah, you're not just Alita's clone anymore. You're actually becoming your own character. And I thought that was great. And yeah, again, the twins are fun. They didn't have enough screen time, and it's not like they really do a whole lot. So I was like, that's fine. As long as they're fun, because yeah, like you were saying, I totally agree with everything you said about Alita, just being moody, boring, and all that. And my main problem with all of that, like, I understood what the mangaka was doing here. Basically, she's thinking of all these decisions because of everything leading up to The Last Order, right? The original series, all that stuff leading up to where they're at the tournament, and she's having like this existential crisis and stuff because she's regaining her old memories and all that. If it was written more interestingly, I would have been fine with it, but the big one that just really bothers me was the reason she got to that state of mind when they went to this certain area, and there was like this general guy who was, training children as soldiers. I think his name was Payne or something like that, like Colonel Payne or whatever. And it was such a nobody character. He didn't even get a full chapter, but he latched onto Alita's mind for a majority of the series. And that's what really bothered me. And I'm like, you've dealt with so many more interesting antagonists that, really mess with your mind in the previous series. How is this character who it's like nobody, you have no problems with it, to affect you so much? That's what really bothered me. And to see it get resolved at the end of the series with Alita interacting with another character, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, we didn't really tie up this loose end. Let's just literally pluck it out of your mind, and now you're free from it. It just really sucks because, again, Alita's the main character for this series, and we're supposed to be rooting for her, but when you have another character who, at first their mission was, I want to surpass Alita because I want to be the superior version. That's what I was designed to be. Having that character change into having their own ambitions and actually being an entertaining main character when Alita's not there. That's just the real big downfall for this. And I guess mainly the other one, I don't know how you felt about it, Oscar, but with how OP she got when eventually she came back, she got like a bunch of upgrades for her body, and just how ridiculously strong she is. Like, she doesn't really struggle anymore when it comes to combat. And I was like, this still isn't that interesting. I mean, it's cool. The fighting choreography is great as always when it comes to her and, everybody else. But I don't know, having her so strong like that and to almost be bored and wants to actually play during these fights, that kind of bothered me.
And I think that part of what the mangaka was trying to do was in trying to steal the personality of a cat. She doesn't like to do anything, mess with anything. She's just like, leave me alone, just like a cat. That part actually kind of makes sense with her personality, but at the same time, it's very like plausible to understand that her personality is shitty. You just come to find out. I agree with you. Kind of sucks that I think the mangaka knew what he was doing, like making Alita a side character and Sex more like the main character. And that's just kind of like disappointing, you know, because it's just like you kind of like intended for this to be a thing, but you shouldn't have even done that in the first place, you know. Like
Hmm.
you were more than completely capable of coming up with a way to make Alita more towards the side of better character development, I should say, you know. This very last part, I'm just going to say really quick, is this. I definitely agree with you when it comes to Colonel Payne. I remember that you had also mentioned that off record, and at the time, I had like no recollection. And it really makes me think about just exactly how huge he was basing, you know, the stem of hatred off of when he like keeps him around as a ghost. I think about it as I like try to recollect everything that I've read, and I'm like, oh no, I don't remember until like you bring it up. And I'm like, oh yeah, but I was like, that was just one part. That was the very first thing that came to my mind, and that's what we were talking about. And I was like, oh, like, you know, like having something like that going throughout the series is just, you know, ridiculous when it comes to like forwarding a character, especially a main character, you know, that you're gonna do. I just think about what you said like all the time when I started rereading it afterwards, and I'm like, this part is so insignificant. It really doesn't even matter. I think that's just kind of bad writing on his part.
Yeah, I think what maybe the problem was when it came to that, and also when it comes to pretty much the main objective Alita had this whole time, right, saving Lou, he had bigger ideas for what the Last Order was going to be. Exploring of pretty much this hierarchy society throughout the solar system, and then we get the stuff with the martial artists from space and philosophical stuff that's going on over there. And then character growth with what he wants to build up with Sex mainly. The stuff with Nova that kind of happens here and there. Then we have to backtrack down back to Earth and see what's going on there because that eventually will become relevant to the story. I think all of that, like with all that in mind, you do kind of get lost. Because like I mentioned, like the main objective Alita had was to save Lou. For a long time, it felt like that was forgotten by Alita herself. Right, when she decided, once she got like this device, which is called the Last Order, like her objective started to change, and yeah, it really did feel like she forgot, like, oh yeah, I have to go get Lou. That's the only reason I'm here. But then, you know, things got pushed aside, and again, much like pulling Pluck out at the very end, it's like, oh wait, yeah, we can't forget the reason we're here, and that's thrown in the last few chapters. And like, yeah, I guess that's just what it is, because there was also another section that I really enjoyed. It was a major flashback arc with one of the new characters that was introduced. And just not to get too much into it, but she's not a cyborg or anything. We're actually getting more, I guess you could say, mythological or fantasy with her being a vampire. And then we get to see her story in the flashbacks, which I was like, oh, this could be its own series on its own. I thought that was really good stuff. But yeah, again, I think with all of that in mind for the series, you just get lost. And I would say that could explain a lot of the faults I have for the writing.
It's like you almost think that it matters some point along the way, and then it just doesn't. But it's nice to see that you went, you know, out of your way to write it that well for it to lead to nothing, you know. Kind of gets your hopes up, and then you're just kind of like, oh. One of the main characters that I find really intrinsic, that I feel like really like made me want to keep reading the story. His name is Trinidad. He's a very like intrinsic character. Let me just say, he's just very spectacular. He can do a lot of things. He has a lot of like tricks up his sleeve and stuff like that. He is an antagonist, but he, for the most part, doesn't play the antagonist mindset. Like, at least not out in the open, of course, but he's a very good character. And I think his design is very cool.
Trinidad's design is perfect because it represents what he's trying to be as a character. You know, it's very fitting. I think all the designs for sure are very fitting. Like, there's one character, yeah, Zeka. His design totally reflects who he is. You know, and there's a bunch of other main characters that come in here that represent that. I really like Trinidad a lot too. He's one of those different types of antagonists to where, you know, it's going to take more than just Alita to punch him to defeat him. And just seeing his backstory fleshed out and how he became to be, and even with like the way he was introduced, I thought was like, oh, this is a big step into what the manga is trying to tell us. Like, okay, moving forward, this is what the scope for like the science fiction we're going to get in the series as far as like technology and all that. Because with his brain, we find out like, I don't know, the way it was drawn, it looked like he still had his normal brain, but I'm pretty sure it's just the chips or something. But I don't know, because there's something that happens at the end where it's, I don't know, it's kind of up in the air, but he has more than one of these MIB chips that the people on Tifaris had. And I was like, oh, okay, so we're changing that up, and then just being able to use technology with just his mind and his hands and a bunch of other stuff that he does. It was really good stuff. Definitely always kept me interested when he was planning on doing something.
Yeah, I definitely agree. He was a very good mastermind. I think that he'd definitely be one of those characters. I'm not say like from a DC standpoint, he reminds me of a flesh version of Brainiac. One of the other characters I do like. Now that you mentioned Zeka, I also like the relationship that he had with another character, Tunpo.
Yes.
That in itself could have been its own series as well. Like that was really cool. And I think that it ties more into the tournament and to the series. It's funny. I think that relationship is more tied into the tournament and the series than Alita's whole plot device put together. Like she's just kind of like removed and like very like, I want to say detached, like from the whole thing altogether. Like you had a comment you mentioned earlier, you probably already said it, but it's just like tournament doesn't really have anything to do with the series, or at least with Alita. Now that you had stated that to me, I'm thinking about it now, and I'm like, yeah, because all these other relationships like actually like involve like the people that are in the tournament, where Alita's just like her own individual. Like the person that she wants is already dead, and she also totally forgot about her. So like whatever. The only thing that she had to do was just like, I think her only plot device was that she had to win the tournament so she can go to Mars.
Entering the tournament was a distraction for what they really wanted to do while they were there. But Alita, being who she is, she doesn't want to lose on purpose. So she's like, well, I still kind of want to win this thing. And then, things happen. And it's like, oh, well, now I have to kind of win this. So that way we could get the reward from this tournament. And then we can actually do something important kind of thing. So it's like the circumstances that has nothing to do with Alita ended up reeling her into the tournament. But still, it's like, if you take the tournament could just be literally its own thing, an arc after they rescue Lou or something, and then it's like, oh, well, let's enter this tournament because we kind of have to kind of thing. Or like they could get captured or something. But yeah, for the most part, I still feel like there's no point, or not no point, but like it doesn't relate to the story as much as it should have.
Did you actually imagine that they were actually going to grab her and then go back? Or did you just, because my interpretation was just like, oh, you guys are way too far out to go back. Like if you grab it, you're just going to send it back. Like that was kind of my interpretation of what they were going to do once they got it.
And I think in Alita's mind, yeah, I think her plan for the most part was to go back. But then as things just happen, it's just like, well, now I can't go back because we get teases for essentially what's the next series is going to be, right? Some characters from Alita's past slowly start showing up. By the end of the series, it splits off in a few ways, but one of them is like, okay, yeah, now we have to backtrack and really just deal with whatever's still out there from Alita's past from like 200 years ago. If that's still out there, let's go and deal with it, kind of thing.
The series in general, I don't know. I love it. There's a lot of things that that they can improve on it, I would say, but you have to admire the things that are really great about it. Just as a whole, like you said earlier, the fighting choreography, that's like one of the greatest things about it. It definitely keeps me going. Me personally, I love the antagonists, like all the antagonists for the series, at least like the really like scientific ones like Nova and Trinidad. They're really intrinsic. They're really like, they have like this really like grand perspective of things and like how things work. I'm even interested in like Nova specifically. I think that he's definitely like number 3 on my top 5 favorite characters, and like all the variations of Nova, because it's just like he's just such a a zany character. Like he like really like just has the most weirdest fucking ideas and perspectives, and it's just always like a left field turn about what's going to happen with Nova. Like I can never really imagine that he's going to be cut out of the series. That's just like one of the things about him that I'm going to expect to see him at one point or another, eventually. That's just how I feel about his character. Like he's just popping up like a fucking gopher, like a groundhog. Like there's just so many of him. It's weird.
Yeah, definitely a wild card. And the things that he was doing throughout Last Order I was like, oh, I can't wait to see what Nova's gonna do next, because literally, who knows? Like you're saying, that there's different versions of him throughout what's going on. And for a while, like in the beginning, I wasn't sure which side he was gonna be on, but then at a certain point, I figured, oh yeah, he's definitely on our side. But then a certain situation happens, and then Nova just says, "Oh yeah, that does make sense, huh? Of course, I would do something like that." And then from there, I was like, "Oh, okay, he's just doing this because he's Nova. He doesn't really think like this is right or wrong type of thing." And I was like, "Oh wow, okay." So he almost had me going for a moment. And even later down the line, there's still some of those moments in the second half of the story, and I thought that was all great. Definitely an interesting way to keep him relevant in the story, because once they start entering the tournament and stuff, it's just like, yeah, he's not really needed to keep pushing the story forward. But when he did show up and he did do that, it was fantastic. A lot of characters really didn't bother me as much as Alita's, and I think again that has to go with Yukito was writing all these new characters, making them interesting. I guess like the only other character that bothered me was Toji. I liked his character in the beginning. He feels like a very like classic type of character, like the role he's playing anyways. But I don't know, at a certain point, like he's being entrusted by other characters that have more experience than him, that are telling him like what the right answers are essentially, but he's too stubborn to really accept that, and he wants to do things his own way. And the people that were giving him the advice and passing the torch on to him were just like, well, he's stubborn, but I guess that's fine. That's just how he is, and I'm going to have to approve that. And it's like, I mean, not really, though. I feel like he does learn some things, but the character growth is not as significant as it should be, because he goes through a lot throughout this whole series, much like Sex. Like, the amount of stuff that happens from when he's first introduced to the very end in the final fight, like, a lot happens, and I feel like he's still more or less the same character. Like, he didn't really absorb a lot of that.
I don't really remember Toji that much. Like, to me, that just means that he wasn't really that much of a memorable character. I would say one of the characters that I really wasn't like, I mean, he's not really like a fighter or anything like that, but it was like two people that really kind of stood out to me at the beginning, and that kind of didn't make an impression to me later. Well, one of them literally couldn't, but if you remember from the very beginning, there was like Nova's apprentice, and his name was like Jim Roscoe. He was like a little blonde kid.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you really thought like that kid was gonna go somewhere, especially like a little later into that arc. He finds some shit out, and he's able to like really on the fly like just change some shit up, and like the plot twist, like as it's like being explained by Nova, is like he's like telling him and commenting about how super impressed he is with his like his intellect, and he's like, I need to get him, like you need to grab him, you know what I mean? It's like that shit is really cool. So it's just like they didn't really play out, of course, because of the way that plot works. But other than that, I was just like, man, that really sucked, because I was just like really looking forward to seeing, especially because they like kind of tease that the series isn't gonna have Nova. You know what I mean? Like just shit, was going on. It was crazy. That's something that I was really looking forward to at first. The other character, his name is Ping. He was very I know that he wasn't supposed to be a fighter, but I just felt like, again, with this like I want to say it's like an established bias that I had grown, like looking forward to all of these new people, like in one way or another. If you weren't a fighter, you were like some sort of cool scientist, and I was just thinking like, oh, this guy's a hacker, and he's like, able to like do a lot of crazy shit with his body and his hands and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's rad, like I was really looking forward to seeing like what was going to happen with him. And I just feel like not much panned out for him. And the things that did it at a very slow pace. It was almost forgettable, like I can barely tell you what happened to him at this point. It was really sad. I just feel like I could have gotten a lot more out of him. He seemed like a really cool character.
Yeah, it felt like the story was ready to move on, but didn't know how to resolve his character. And it's like, oh, he fulfilled his role for the story, now let's move on. But like, oh, but wait though, like it's kind of like the story was kind of going a little bit fast right there. And then like just things kept happening left and right during a certain critical moment with him. And then much like with Lou's story and, you know, a few other things, he was just put on the back burner for a long time. And it's the story is just telling us like, oh, I mean, okay, it's time to move on to something more interesting. And yeah, I agree with you. It's like if you're not a fighter, you're kind of, and if you're not a scientist, you're just left waiting for your screen time to show up so that way you could resume being who you were as a character. His story was part of what was expanding what the objective was for Alita's team at being at this tournament. The fact that it was dealt with so fast by multiple characters, yeah, he was just like blown out like a candle, just no time to really end his story, which sucks. But yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of that in here. But I mean, you know, overall, I still enjoy reading this manga. Like, there's a lot of fantastic stuff in here, and whether or not it all flows seamlessly is, you know, it's not the best, but the stories in here are great. That's for sure. I think, you know, what could have made this better probably is what the original series was, right? Because in Battle Angel, Alita, it was more segmented, whereas here in Last Order, everything was like back to back, and there was like no time to go to a different area or to have new problems rise up while others are getting resolved. It was just all one continuous flow, and maybe that's just not the best for this mangaka, because a lot of this stuff can feel separate and stand alone, you know, and I think that's the best when he writes, but just having it so close together, I wouldn't say it hurt all the stories, but the overall of what was the Last Order about, you know, I think it hurts that, because even then, like, it's not even about what the Last Order was, you know, like that's something that wasn't really used at the end.
Yeah, I couldn't tell if it's just, you know, more on a play on words. I think that's what he was trying to do. It's really hard to say. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's the fact that all of these events are happening on one singular timeline. Like, there aren't any flashbacks, and the flashbacks that are happening like instantaneously in somebody's head. I've seen it like with Zazie, I saw it with Alita, you know, we see it with Sarula. Just these moments where you think that you can get some good pull out of it, you know, or at least like some, not just internal monologue, but actual monologue. I feel like a lot of things were definitely misplaced. If you had taken the chance to maybe refocus your timeline.
What's crazy is there were plenty of moments throughout like the middle section here to have a breather, right? There was definitely downtime in between important fights during the tournament. You know, during those moments, things did change a lot in between, and we could have just had the team sit down and basically just reassess what's going on, bring up important subjects and things that were just, you know, left on the back burners, like we've been saying on the episode. And I think if we would have just had that, it would have felt probably more organic, because we just have characters doing what they want to do, and it's all going in different directions, and we just needed a moment to reel everyone in. It's like, hey, do we know what we're all doing? Are we all clear? You know, can we just get a team huddle real quick? Okay, you're doing that, I'm doing this, cool. And then let's continue on, so that way at least everybody has an understanding of where they should be and what the story is going to be going for. Yeah, I mean, there's a big moment, if you remember, where Alita and Sex they were butting heads, because it was a long time in the manga before they saw each other again, and at that point is when she grew, you know, the cattail, and they were in, I mean, it's not like the locker room, but basically the locker room is where they were hanging out before the next round of the tournament, and right there it could have definitely been the stuff that I just mentioned in there, instead of just them butting heads and Alita running away because she wants to go think about something that's not really relevant.
The Last Order was one of my favorites out of the three.
But yeah, man, like overall, aside from the complaints, I would still recommend this series. I mean, like we're saying, there's still a lot of good stuff here. It's just the transitions in between all of that I kind of have a problem with. But I think there's definitely more interesting stuff here to keep you engaged compared to like if this story was playing out, let's say on Earth, because there's not a lot of variations with what you can do on Earth over there. It probably wouldn't have hit me as good, right? Because they just don't have the technology to push with how they were doing it in space.
Yeah,
so I think that definitely gives it the plus.
It's also a lot. I feel like you saw what Earth has to offer since the first part of the series. There's not really much more that you're gonna find, considering that it was, decimated and essentially like just left there to die. Then again, come to find out, a lot of these other places aren't really like further developed either. You really get a lot of the same sensations, more or less, just kind of different environments, just the way that they're drawn. But it's literally still just like, I forgot what that slum is called, but like the very first part of the series.
One last thing, just to mention real quick before we get out of here. I did say the art's great, and it is, it's still fantastic throughout the whole series. Just my only real complaint is in the beginning how Alita's face was drawn. It was so different from how we left her in the main series, and it's just like it always kind of bothered me a little bit how, I don't know, it was just something about like her facial structure and like the way he changed like how he drew the lips was something I was like, it took a while to get used to.
And I think that's kind of evident in a lot of like the poses that she has in volumes and like chapter covers and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. All of her fighting expressions, all of her like poses, just everything has her with her kind of her mouth open, just slightly agape.
I feel like it could play into like what her character has become in Last Order, an airhead into what's going on, right? Like stuff that's really not about her. She just has no interest in, so she kind of just would have like a blank face, and like that's like the expression she would have on her face or something. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, like she's just kind of like staring at nothing. She's kind of like lost in thought. I mean, it's just like,
yeah, and I think it's safe to say for the most part that's really kind of what she was doing, reminiscing with older memories when she was a soldier on Mars. Even kind of stuff like that, she was still like just kind of dazed and confused. That's my only real complaint. I mean, eventually it gets better with her, so I was like, okay. But just, it was just very noticeable for me in the beginning. So I think with all that, safe to say we could go ahead and wrap up this episode for today. And again, overall, we would still recommend checking it out. Still a lot of great stuff to go through. Like we said, Mars Chronicles, that's the continuation for the series. It's still ongoing right now, and that picked up immediately after. Like, I think it was a few months after Last Order ended is when Mars Chronicles started. So I don't know when I'm going to pick that up yet. I'm going to see where I could shuffle that in, but I might just give it some time to just build up and, for me to check out other series before I feel like getting back into what Alita is doing. While we wait for that and future episodes, you can send us an email on universepodcast@gmail.com if you have any questions or comments. We'd love to talk about on the next episode, as always. And while we wait for those episodes, you can follow us on social media @UnversPodcast, and we'll let you know when episodes are out. So, thanks, guys, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Go like a tundra, I keep telling them, running the numbers inside my head. I find it slumber amongst the mud. It's bubbling, find it harder to juggle. Lack of momentum, stuck in the struggle, and now the trench is just a rut. It's my mind and my mind only. Peace signs, and if I find homies, maybe I can fly. Only try living out my life as if that wasn't just a dream. Maybe make some cream, or is it just a thought that died slowly? I've been soaking in the chili, trying to find me some funds. I've been sickly, hella recently. Don't wanna get up, put the green down because it costing too much. It's nothing physical I feel, but emotionally I am blunt. Stay reigns, I'm the lemon or otherwise. Looking in the mirror, looking back to the other guys like fuck it. I just take a shake and some fries. I just need to watch my rate for all the reasons I cannot provide. Snake trains, I hope headlight trains of guilt when I leave the presence, cause I don't think you trying to build. Crush the flower by the hour, but it passes. Time won't stand still no matter how much I gas it. Snake trains, I hope here like trains of guilt. When I leave the presence, cause I don't think you trying to build. Crush the flower by the hour, but it passes. Time won't stand still no matter how much I gas it.